Well, good morning. We're gonna jump right in and just start talking. I am just curious. I see a lot of different folk out here, and I'd like to get an understanding of. And I'm glad they gave me a wireless mic because I like to walk around too. I'd like to get an understanding of what types of projects you all have. First, how many of you all are familiar, have done fundraising before? If you said on a scale of 1 to 10, you say you're at an 8 or so. That's okay. How many at about a 5? Good. How many at about a 3? I think you all are holding back on me. I really do. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to start from ground zero, and the good thing is that you don't have to have a fundraising background to do fundraising. I came into fundraising, actually, I was a marketer, brand marketing and product marketing for Hallmark and Verizon, and launched DSL nationwide and did all of those marketing things and marketing research things, and had no background whatsoever in fundraising before I started fundraising. And so I moved into fundraising because there are some core skills that you just need in order to move into fundraising. And part of it is marketing based, but there are just a set of core skills. And so hopefully what you'll see is that you're able to do the fundraising, but what we're talking about now is not the fundraising that a lot of people think about. It's not going to be kind of the bake sales, fruit sales, golf tournaments even kind of fundraising. We're talking about really systematic things, and some of it is face-to-face, like you're saying, when you're saying you've got to kind of knock on some doors. But we're going to talk about leveraging relationships and building relationships as well, and how we can utilize those and how we can have a team to move forward. Okay? Now, in terms of projects, I usually like to break things up into projects. This is a pretty big group, so it might be a little bit difficult. But is there anyone that has a fundraising who has fundraising projects right now that they're having to work on or that they're considering right now? So you do. Okay, and do you mind if I walk around to you, because we want to be able to leverage this group to help as much as possible. So if I forget who you are, because I've seen, I think, 4 hands, which is good, what I want you to do just basically is just tell me what type of project is it, and if we could do it in like 30 seconds, that would be great. So tell me what type of project you're wanting to fundraise on so that we can be thinking about that. Can we get a mic here? Oh, no. Great, thank you.
Okay, my name is Marie Maxwell, and I'm the president of the Jamaican Adventist Association. It's giving back to our country, to church-operated basic schools in the rural areas who don't have a proper building and proper facilities for the children to learn. So we fundraise, and the fundraising that we're working on for next month is a boat ride on Father's Day. So I think it's to about 400 people, and so that's what we're working on.
Okay, great. And it sounds like a lot of what you're wanting to do is capital campaign to be able to build a building or add on to a building, possibly even buses and that sort of thing, plus an annual fund for whatever they need to run the school. So your capital campaign and annual fund for school. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Phyllis Josie. I'm a member of the New Rochelle Seventh-day Adventist Church. The church building is attached to the Westchester Area School. Our church is predominantly a senior citizens church. The members are unable to get up and down the steps. We are looking at installing an elevator between the church and the school, where the school will have access to it as well as the church, and this will go up 3 floors.
Oh, great. Okay, excellent. And so that's another capital campaign idea, because it's something that's capitalized. If you think about buildings, if you think about larger equipment, those sorts of things, those are capital campaigns. So this may be a much larger capital campaign. This one probably is kind of a smaller capital campaign, which is good. Still have to go through the same processes, But we want to think about these, and you really want to pay attention, because we're actually going to use these projects today as we start walking through some exercises. Okay?
I'm Jim Blazer from Victory SDA Church. I'm thinking about doing a fundraiser for, to add some monies to our VBS budget.
Mm-hmm.
That's one project, and the other project is also, we're looking towards trying to get some funds from now for Christmas, end of year celebration activities for the children in the community.
Okay, got it. So yours is children in community, basically kind of local church budget almost sorts of things. Good. So we have church, we have 2 capital campaigns, and there was one more hand back here. Oh, said I passed by, I'm not going to pass you by.
My name is Kathleen Farrer. I'm from Community Worship Center. But I have an independent ministry where I have a team of expert nursing educators, and we go to different African countries. We've been to Liberia, we've been to Ghana, we've been to Nigeria, and we do training. So I'm trying to raise money so that we can do more for our team.
Great. And your team does what type of training again?
Education, professional nursing education.
So you do professional nursing education, primarily overseas.
Yeah, we are focusing on developing countries, but
Mhm.
the administrator there,
Mm-hmm.
and helping them, giving them education and state of the art and how they can use the resources that they have there.
I see, I see. It's very similar to some work that I did for Mercy Ships, actually, that does some similar sorts of things, but delivers care as well.
The Worship Center, my name is Lorna Irving, and I'm trying to raise funds for our finalists to go to Auschwitz in 2019. And I'm trying to raise at least a good $45,000.
$45,000. Okay. You did that. See, now she's saying you just missed it because she said she did that in 1 year, 30,000. You might want to turn around and look and see and connect, right? Because ideas are wonderful, right? And you've got a great group here to be able to do that.
Good morning, my name is Aurora Morales Gil from the Queens Hispanic Seventh-day Adventist Church here in New York. We want to fundraise to create an after-school program for the kids of the Corona community where our church is located, as well job training for the parents. We have offered the OSHA trainings for them to get a construction job, but we want to expand that to serve more families, to reach more families, helping the parents to get a job and the kids to Corona is mostly Title I school. That means the elementary school kids get, most of them get a free lunch. Because the poverty level is 5.
Okay. Okay, great, great. So I think we covered everyone, right? Okay, we'll take one last one.
My name is Elton Souza. I'm involved in this community center. It's a health community center in Chicago area, and we try to do some fundraising to pay off a building we just purchased.
Okay, great. Excellent. Excellent, excellent. So you've heard a lot of different types of campaigns, a lot of different types of fundraising. There are going to be some steps that are basically the same, and there are going to be some steps that are much different. So if we jump in, we're going to talk through these various areas. We're going to talk about the fundraising process overall, because we might want to kind of erase some of the things that we might have learned about fundraising, or at least put it on another board in your mind. And let's walk through this process that we're going through now, because this is a process that whether you are an individual with your own 501c3, or you are a large organization, large umbrella church, like the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or other global organizations, humanitarian organizations, they're all using the same processes. I had clients that were churches like Moody Bible Institute that raised money for missionaries to go abroad to do fundraising training. Radio Ministries, Northwestern Radio, where Billy Graham started that radio station and college. Moody Bible Institute, Moody Radio, so tuition assistance. Feeding America also, but most of my clients have been Christian clients. But all of them really are using this same process, these same processes that we're going through right now. Okay? So we want to get a bit fundamental understanding of the processes, and we're going to want to look at the sources of philanthropy. Because we're going to know where do the funds really come from, because you're going to find out that there may be some misnomers about where funds really and truly do come from. Oh, absolutely. Thank you. And then we're going to look at why do people give. Dr. Kwan just mentioned that as you're marketing, and that's what you're really doing here with fundraising. You know, I tell people consistently, I've never worked in sales, but I've worked in marketing quite a bit. And I worked for an ad agency, was senior vice president for an agency where we had to get clients. But my mentality was that I'm marketing to them, meaning I want to understand what their needs are, and I want to speak to those needs and meet those needs. I don't have a widget that I'm just trying to walk in with and I'm going to sell you this thing no matter what. Right? If you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? That's not the case for what we're doing here, right? So it's not, oh, we've got this project and now we got to sell this project. No, what we're really looking to do is to connect with people that are going to have values that resonate with the values that we have as an organization. And so we're going to talk about why people give. And then we're going to look at capital campaigns versus annual campaigns, which we kind of touched on. And know that all of these slides are actually in your handout that was given to you. And we've also got an additional book. And I'm going to hold. This is the one that I am often using right now. The material should be the same as the material that you have there, basically. So don't worry about that. But we're going to talk about annual campaigns versus capital campaigns, with annual campaigns being the campaign that takes care of the ongoing needs of the nonprofit. That's when you're trying to do your community services work as a humanitarian group, trying to feed people, and you've got to pay for basic overhead. You've got to be able to pay for program service costs. You've got to be able to buy equipment to render those services. That's annual. But we're also going to talk about the capital campaign process. And the capital campaign process is where we're looking at things that are capitalized from an accounting standpoint. Things that, let's just say they're large assets, right? Right, buildings, what else? What other things come under that? Equipment, what else? Transportation. Those are the basic categories, right? It's usually what we're talking about, okay? I've raised money for helicopters, I've raised money for motorcycles, I've raised money for buildings. So all of those things were under capital campaigns. We've done scholarship funds for schools. We support ongoing operating costs for schools and churches. Those are annual things, right? In a local church, the annual campaign is really the local church budget, right? Okay. And then we want to understand the board's role in philanthropy. And I want to stress this because the board's role in philanthropy is different than the church's board. It's extremely different than a church board. And so for this to be successful, even if you are associated with the church, which everyone in this room is, we're going to have to help people on our boards understand that board work for this type of entity is more than governance. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's really important because when other people are giving, some of the questions they're going to have are, how is your board supporting from a financial standpoint? Oh, well, we're volunteers. Oh, I serve on many boards. Oh, it really doesn't matter because all those people we're talking to are going to say the same thing. Many of them serve on other boards that you don't even know about. Many of them are working with other nonprofits. Many of them are giving to other nonprofits, and they're volunteering in our churches just like you are, right? And so they're going to want to know that the board is at least as passionate in every vehicle, in every way, as you want them to be, right? So when we look at our expected outcomes, we just want to make sure that we're fully understanding the board's role, that we're understanding what the leadership needs to do, and that we're committed as fundraisers to what we're needing to do on an ongoing basis. So with that, we're going to jump right in, okay? So who am I? I kind of talked about that a little bit already. Oakwood alum. Wasn't born in fundraising, moved into fundraising from marketing. And the important thing for me, from your standpoint, is that you recognize that there are no particular high-level skills that are needed to do fundraising. What you really have to do is tune into people's needs, and that's more marketing. And those are skills that can be learned. This is just an article. We mentioned marketing. Christianity Today has a publication called Outcomes Magazine, and they had asked me to write an article for them on branding, and this is an article that I had written some time ago. And so it's just a good primer to get people thinking about what branding really is. It's a promise. It's really not about like color palettes and all those sorts of things that we often think about. But it's, what do I really expect when someone says Adventist Community Service, or when we say we have XYZ project, what's the expectation? And that's important even when we're thinking about donors, right? Because donors, you can kind of put in the word investor in place of donors, and you'll really have the right orientation at that point. Because what does an investor want to know? Everything. Everything like what? Talk to me. Financials. Where do you spend the money? Credibility. Return on interest. That's right, and they have an interest, don't they? They're not looking for dollars coming back, but they're looking for outcomes to come back, right? Okay, what else? I'm sorry? Leverage. Talk to me a little bit more with leverage.
I guess I've seen other donors or sponsors coming in and investing because they know you're doing a good job.
Got you. Absolutely, absolutely. So we're leveraging the outreach that we have and the donor impact that we have. Absolutely. All those sorts of things. Do they expect reporting? Yes. Do they just take our word for it? No. Do they expect a written plan? Yes. Yeah. So we see how all of these things are so different? If we put this into another framework that we all understand, which is if someone's investing in something we're doing, they're investing in our business, and that's exactly what donors are doing, then our orientation is going to be correct to really be able to do major fundraising that's going to go above and beyond kind of the bake sale sorts of things, or getting gifts that are gifts because they like Michael or they like Michael's kids, right? Okay. Just so that you know, well, let me ask you, how many of you are familiar with PSI, Philanthropic Service for Institutions? Okay, a couple. We have some work to do there, don't we, to make sure that we're out. And this is part of the reason that I always talk through what PSI does. PSI is a department within the North American Division, and we are responsible for the fundraising training, consulting, and education for the church. Now, we don't do the fundraising for the church or for the church institutions, but we provide the consulting to teach people how to do those things. And you'll see why very soon, because if you got a chance to look at those books and you read through the introduction, you probably saw a section that talked about volunteers being the ones that really want to go out and make an ask. And why do you think you would want volunteers primarily as opposed to someone standing from the North American Division or a consultant that was hired for a lot of money? They could answer the questions. You're doing the work? Grassroots level. Passion. More credible? Why are they more credible? That's right. They're there on the job. They have passion that we've talked about. They're committed. They have the relationships also, don't they? So they know the language? Exactly. Exactly. So when I get calls saying things like, can you give us, at that time, Michelle Obama's phone number because we heard that she's into community gardens, then we start to see that probably isn't going to really go very far for them, right? Or we heard that Warren Buffett invests in, or Bill Gates invests in, or even the other call and these are all real calls, or the other calls like, can you give us a list of the Adventist philanthropists because they will give? Well, we're going to find out that they're making some smart investment decisions, and we want to be smart about how to make sure they're making more of those investment decisions. So we do fundraising, training, consulting, education. We also, that just went. Okay, we also have a newsletter that we've changed actually from the $1 to Inside Philanthropy and Fundraising. What is the name of that newsletter again? Inside Philanthropy and Fundraising. I'm repeating that because I should take time right now and tell you to go sign up now. You really want to sign up for that newsletter because we've changed that newsletter. And the reason I'm calling it Inside Philanthropy and Fundraising is that what I'm trying to do is make sure that people have the inside picture of what you have to do on a bite-by-bite basis in order to successfully fundraise. So in that, we talk about webinars that are free, available to you from your houses, that you don't have to travel to go to. Anytime any of those sorts of events are happening, I list those out there. And so we want to make sure, oh, hey, how are you doing? I didn't even see there. We want to make sure that that information is openly available to you. So Inside Philanthropy and Fundraising, we're going to ask you to sign up for that newsletter. And then we have capacity building grants, some grants that we work with schools called Model Academy for Philanthropy grants to help them establish their fundraising. We've got grants also for people that are moving into fundraising and wanting to work for some of the larger institutions. And then Capital Campaign Guidance, Academy Fundraising that I've mentioned before, and then Grant Search Services, which we'll hit later, okay? So the MAP program, just so that you know overall, because some of you mentioned schools, North American Division schools, if they have a full-time, if they commit to hiring a full-time fundraiser, they usually want to come in here at level 3, which is a $40,000, a minimum $40,000 grant program, $10,000 reimbursed at the end of the first year, $15,000 at the end of the second year, $15,000 at the end of the third year. This, for most schools, would amount to a couple of different major gifts, right? And so we provide that sort of a grant to help them get established as well. That's the newsletter, just to kind of get a visual. And we're going to move right in to nonprofit organizations. How can you get signed up? Oh, excellent question. How can we get signed up for the newsletter? We can go to www.philanthropic service, no S, philanthropic service, singular, philanthropic service for institutions. Yes. And then we go to the resource tab, and I should probably up now. Philanthropic service for institution. Yeah, and you can just put it into the web search, and it will come right up if you just put it into Google.
So it's a .com.
Yes, it's a .com.
So it's philanthropic service for institutions.com.
Philanthropicservice.com will work, actually. It's the shorter name, philanthropicservice.com. Sorry about that, philanthropicservice.com. And then at the top, you see a bunch of resources. You see a bunch of menu items. And one of those menu items is resources. And you'll drop down to where it says e-newsletter, right? You're going to drop down to where it says e-newsletter. And there you see a sign-up box, a form like this. Just a form there. So we go to philanthropicservice.com, go to the resources, drop down to e-newsletter, and you can sign up right there. Excellent. Thank you for that question. So the primary purpose of a nonprofit organization is that it works with a cause. It works with a cause. When I mentioned Feeding America, which used to be America's Second Harvest, that was one of my clients. What was their cause? What might their cause be? I'm sorry, say that again? To eliminate hunger, and especially in America, because it's, yes, Feeding America, so excellent. When we think about your project, what would be the cause?
It's assisted in the rural area. There are some children that still go to school for the first time at 6 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So we are helping to eliminate that and those with the students that learning
Excellent, excellent. And so basically we could say equal access to education for underprivileged children, right? So you see those causes are what nonprofit's going to start talking about. It's not the project, it's the cause. And when they're interested in the cause, after we've talked about the cause, then we start talking about, well, how are we going to do what we're promising to do? That's what they're investing in, right? In the outcome that will happen, that we're going to increase the number of children in Jamaica going to schools by X% or to X number, right? Those sorts of things. Does that make sense? This isn't a difference with no distinction. This is really critically important because oftentimes we skip over the fact that we're dealing with a cause and we jump to our internal needs. So when I'm talking with people and I'm saying, look, when you're thinking about your communications, I always say, think of it like a camera, right? The camera, well, nowadays, I guess if it's a phone camera, it can be pointed at yourself a lot, right? But normally, a camera is focused outward, right? And we're looking here and we're constantly telling a story outside, right? That's what our donor communications have to do as well as we're attempting to raise money. So when we look at boards and we say, well, overall, generally, what does a board really do? The board is really responsible for handling the organization. Yes, sir.
I just want to make sure I have the right understanding of board.
Uh-huh.
You're not talking about a church board. You're talking about boards abroad. Or
Not quite, and I'm glad you asked that question. Let me clarify, because I should have clarified that. When I'm talking about a board, there are all types of nonprofit boards. And essentially, if we think about, let's move away from a nonprofit and let's go to a for-profit company, right? You've got employees, right? You've got executive management, right? And then for very large organizations, there is a board across the top of that. A managing board is often what it's called. You've got a board that governs what happens with the organization. Now, for a nonprofit organization, the board is really important. And being a board member, some people don't really understand that a nonprofit organization is owned by the public. It's not owned by the organization, it's owned by the public, okay? So it's accountable to the public. And there are laws and processes and procedures that we have to abide by as board members. And the board is responsible, legally and ethically, for the nonprofit institution. So when people really understand that, sometimes they will pause a bit when they're having to form a board. Now you may say, look, we may not have a board for our ACS efforts. In some instances, there's going to be a church board that's governing it. In some instances, with something like the Wellness Center, they may have a separate board that they have formed as well to operate underneath the church board, to manage the ongoing operations of that thing. So basically, they're concerned about three things. I would say that a board provides gas, G-A-S, governance, ambassadorship, and sustainability. When I say governance, what might we be talking about? Yes, oversight, operations, policies and procedures, budgeting, those sorts of things. The things that we're used to doing in the board meeting, right? So we have governance down really well. Ambassadorship. What might we be talking about there? Reaching abroad, that's right. Reaching out. What does our ambassador do? Represents who? Yes, the country, the organization, right? And when they're representing the organization, what do they need to do on an ongoing basis? Communication. Communicating about what? About what? About the group, about what's going on, what's happening, what's hot and exciting. Are they excited about what's going on? Are they responsible for generating more enthusiasm and getting more people on board? Exactly. So for all of, say that again? That's right. They have to believe very deeply, so deeply, that they've committed their time, significant time, to consistently talking about that organization, to consistently making people aware, right, of the organization and the organization's needs. Now, that might be different than my board role when I was a Sabbath school superintendent. I might not have fully understood that, right? I might not have understood that when I am a board member sitting on the local church board for whatever reason. But that's what really is happening with successful boards and successful nonprofit organizations. So we had governance, ambassadorship, and what's the last one? The S? Sustainability. Sustainability. What makes a nonprofit organization sustainable? Being able to continue on and on. Resources. What kind of resources? Financial resources. Human resources. You have to have volunteers working, like most of us in this room, right? We've got to have funds to be able to purchase all these things that we need, right? Succession planning, absolutely. And if I go back to the financial piece of that, it's not just managing the budget then at that point, is it? Now we're talking and spending most of our time really talking about how to get more resources so that we can do more work in the community, right? Now, does that feel like what most of our church boards are doing right now? That's why we want to make sure that they understand the differences between what we need as an ACS group versus what we need as most of the other church ministries that they're used to dealing with, because they won't have that perspective that those are the sorts of needs that we need. And we can talk about how they can help with those things. Part of that I already mentioned, donating, right? What do you think might be some other ways that the board could help? We talked about relationships.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, announcing things.
That's right, announcing things.
You know, the programs and so forth that are available, and you know, the opportunity to volunteer and so forth.
Yeah, what programs are available, what opportunities there are to volunteer, to promote. What about talking to their friends, their families? What about being on the lookout for people that could be great donors for the project that we are doing? What about thinking about businesses that may be fantastic that we can get gifts in kind, and we'll talk about those things. So you see, this slide looked really simple when we just had the little heart in there, right? But there's a lot behind that, right? There's a lot behind that. So that's what our board is really doing. We want them to handle with care. I'm not going to worry about that other slide. If were dealing more with boards, I would get to the board members and I would actually have them. Actually, let me go back to that and tell you how you can utilize that. So when I'm talking with people on a board, one of the exercises that I usually do is I'll say, why do you care? Why did you care enough to be on the board? Now see, that gets rid of serving by position, right? Because that doesn't talk about caring, right? I want to know their passion and why they're doing it. And I want them to key into that passion. And I want you, when you're talking to any of your supporters, whether it's a board or a church board, to make sure you're helping them key into why they care and what they care about. Make sure they're understanding the cause. And then how do you care? In other words, what difference are we making by being board members? If you show up at the meeting or you don't show up at a meeting, is there a critical difference? Right? These are the types of conversations that we want to have with the board. We want to know that what they're doing, that they're caring, makes a difference. Make sense? Okay. So I've walked through these, so you've got slides here just as a reminder, but I've walked through these sorts of things already. This is where I really want to land. So I can tell you that when I heard about fundraising and I said, fundraising? What do you feel about fundraising? Difficult? Uncomfortable? So, activity? Oh, creativity. Great. Creativity. What else? A challenge? Good. Excitement, intimidating. Apprehension. Say that again. Lengthy. Could be. If we think about these barriers, these things come out when we're starting to fundraise. And some of those things can be eliminated. Things like the uneasiness can be eliminated if we can get training and understand what it really is. It could become less intimidating if people actually understand that when we're doing fundraising, we don't get to an asking people for money, and we assume that that ask is a live ask, but it's not always face-to-face. But we don't get to that until we get 3/4 of the way around a fundraising process. There are all these other things that people can become involved in for all these different types of personality types, and we'll talk about those things. We want to underscore that, right? So we want to think about those barriers to fundraising because they will come out, especially if you're having to work on a major project like a capital campaign, and you've got to ask for significant dollar amounts. If I feel unprepared, it's going to be very difficult for me to ask someone to donate $50,000 to this project, or to donate $500,000 to this project over a couple of years, right? So I've really got to feel like I have everything nailed down, and that's why we're going to walk through every step of the process. What fundraising is not is this, right? Fundraising is not begging. If it feels like begging, we're not doing it right. And if you feel like this cat, it's like, oh, this cat is, I'm through, I have had it, I can't go another step. That cat probably was running a capital campaign, right? It's long term. So the more organized we are, the better off we're going to be, right? We're going to be. It's going to make things easier. If it feels like we're begging, then there's an issue. Just a personal story. I remember one of the first fundraising things that I had ever done was when Hurricane Katrina had hit. I was talking to people about needs, and I had 20 people in my house. I'm from New Orleans. I grew up in New Orleans. Had moved to Dallas. I had 20 people that were in my house because their houses were flooded, and they couldn't get back into the state, period. Nowhere to go. And so they were there. And so I would just share with people about it. I really wasn't trying to, raise a lot of money or anything, but it was easy for me to talk about that. And then other people that knew me started talking to their friends. And they're saying, we think you need another refrigerator. We think that you probably need this additional food. Long story short, I walked to my mailbox and there's a check in there from San Juan, Puerto Rico. I open it up and I'm going, I know people from Puerto Rico, but I don't know anyone in San Juan. And I certainly don't know this church. And there's a check there for $200 because the church had heard what we were doing and wrote a check. So when we're looking at it and we make sure that people really understand what we're doing, it won't feel like begging. They just know that you're trying to meet a need. And people usually want to help meet a need any way that they can. Sometimes we'll hear fundraising is not biblical, and you need to know that. That people oftentimes will feel like, well, the Lord provides, and He does provide, without a doubt. But fundraising is definitely biblical, and we see instances of fundraising in Scripture itself, right? Now, one of the things we look at when we're dealing with boards is we want to make sure that they see this perspective where David comes in, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but where David comes in and he says that Solomon really is trying to raise some funds to build a temple, okay? Now, this wasn't the first fundraising campaign, okay? But we're going to look at the structure of what happened because it parallels really well with what we're telling you should do. But even if we go back to Exodus and we think about the building of the temple, did God tell Moses, just stand there, hold your hands up, they will come and they will bring what they need? No, if we actually read through that, then we'll see that Moses tells them exactly what the project is, exactly what they're raising funds for, why this is important, exactly what the needs are, exactly how it's going to be used. And then he makes a statement where he says, it's the Holy Spirit that moves on the hearts of men to give. If someone rejects giving to a God-ordained kingdom outcome project, that's not on you. Your job is to do what Moses did, which is let people know what the needs are, right? And those that the Holy Spirit draws in, he draws in. But we want to do that well, our job well. And that's what we're talking about. When we're talking about leadership, church leadership, then we're going to see that David actually gave, and he gave from his own funds, right? And after he gave from his own funds, then, so we're all the way at the center of the organization, right? After he gave of his own funds, then management, the leaders were giving. Then people on the outside saw their giving and became very encouraged, so encouraged that the families gave also, right? So it was a very inside to out process. So we just wanted to kind of highlight that for you and not spend a lot of time, but you at least have a reference there to talk about this, because I can guarantee you that you are going to run into some people that are going to think that fundraising is not biblical. But really, fundraising is about nurturing, and it's about nurturing these relationships so that we can move forward. So how can we do this well? How can we do it well? We've got 6 rights of fundraising. What's that first one? The right person. What might we mean by that? Is everybody the right person to start asking? No. So
You have to have somebody who is friendly. I mean, some people are very standoffish and they have a hard time opening up. You know, and that's not the person you want to have trying to fundraise. You know, they can't even speak without having a positive appearance.
yeah, oftentimes we want someone that is just a great connector, great people person. Now, believe it or not, if you look at me, and the Myers-Briggs scores, the kind of scores that look at what personality types you have extroverts and you have introverts. Which one do you think I am? See, because I'm standing in front of a group, we're thinking extrovert. You're exactly right. I'm a high I introvert. Not meaning that I can't talk to people, but that I prefer to do things more one-on-one. And that's what fundraising is, right? We talked about relationships. So even a quiet person can do that, right? Because they're talking to people that they know and they have relationships with. Same people they have conversations with, they're just having a conversation about a cause now, right? So you can be an introvert or an extrovert in fundraise. But if you're having them stand up in front of people to do a public event and those sorts of things, then you probably want someone that's more extroverted. Someone like my wife that just gets energy from throwing a party, and I'm going, whew, is this over yet? Because I need to recharge. You know, and I love it. I love the people, but I've got to recharge, and I know that about myself, right? But there's still a place for me in fundraising. I mean, I told you I was senior vice president of a couple of different agencies. Yet, I'm an introvert. It's like all the way at the other end of the chain introvert, not in the middle kind of, right? So good. What other things about the right person? I just mentioned some things here. They've got to have relationships, right? Who has the closest relationship with the individual that we're talking about? That would be the right person. Who could open the door for the call? Maybe they're not comfortable talking about it, but maybe they could be trained to talk about it, right? There are really wonderful books, and I see your hands, I'm going to come to you right now. There are wonderful books, and write this title down, the book called The Ask, T-H-E-A-S-K, The Ask, is a wonderful book if you need to talk to learn to talk to people so that you can have the conversation to ask for major funds. Yes, the book is called The Ask, T-H-E-A-S-K. I don't remember the author, but there's only one. If you Google it, I guarantee you it'll come up. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, okay, no problem. Yeah, and I was trying to repeat the questions as much as possible so that we could do that. But yeah, thank you. We'll use this when we can. The Ask, and it's going to help us. There's another resource that if you reach out to me, I will send to you, and it's a list of some sorts of questions. It's called, if you just say questions to ask, it's by the Osborne Group. And they created a really nice list of some things that just kind of help you carry a conversation in a fundraising context. talking about the project, those sorts of things. But if you send me an email, I'll get that to you. What's my email address?
By Laura Fredericks?
Pardon me?
This book. By Laura Fredericks?
Yes, Laura Frederick. Yes, thank you. Laura Frederick. The Ask. So he was saying that the book is by Laura Frederick. It's The Ask. The Ask. And it's the only one that's going to pop up when you go to, go to Google or go to Amazon or whatever. When you put in The Ask, it's going to come up. Yes. No, this is Laura. Well, he actually even copied the color palette of hers. But yeah, it's by Laura. Okay? The Ask. The Ask. Frederick, yes. And so with that, and I'll put that in, and I'll make sure that I give that title also to Dr. Kwan for follow-up that he's going to send out to you afterward. Okay? My email is Michael, M-I-C-H-A-E-L, Michael Brown. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. At NAD Adventist, singular, NAD like North American Division, Adventist, singular, .org. Michael Brown at nadadventist.org. Just remind me you were at this session and that you wanted those resources that I talked about in terms of the Ask and the Osborne group. Kind of keep a list. So that's the right person, right? Then we get to the right prospect. Now, why might I say the right prospect? Not everyone's going to be interested in every project. So now we see the work of starting to align projects with people, right? That's right. And sometimes when you start with the right person, it spurs giving of other people, right? So we're looking at the right person, the right prospect, in the right way. What might in the right way mean? Should it be a call? Maybe it's a letter. Maybe it's literature that they need beforehand, before you have this big conversation about a big project. Maybe a live conversation. So in the right way, for the right amount. For the right amount. This makes us uncomfortable sometimes, right? Give as the Lord leads you. Did that statement actually help them at all? No. If they're Christians, they were already praying as the Lord led them. We haven't given them any more clarity. Think back to Exodus. Moses didn't say, whatever you plundered from the Egyptians, whatever you want to give us, just give us, we'll make it work. No. People need to know specifically what's needed. And they need to know that what they're giving really counts. Sometimes it's a really large gift and you're saying, you know what, really, I can't make a capital campaign on $5 donations only. I need those. But you know what, I also need this lead gift that is going to be $250,000. Pause and let them think about it. And they're thinking about it, right? Sometimes they are smaller gifts. And that's great too. And we want to let people know that those smaller gifts work for us. And we had 2 hands in the back, and I'm going to ask this, the young man that's in the back on the right. Do you mind running this mic for us? Because if I keep going, if I go back here, then everyone up there can't see me. Do you mind running this for me? Thank you.
I know even some donors get offended when you ask for something too small because their sites are higher. So even doing research on your donor and understanding what their giving capacity is really can help your ask.
Absolutely. You need to know about them, know their passion, have a sense for how much you're probably asking them to give, doing some research, thinking about what do they do for a living? Do they own a business? What might be the amount that they could give? You're absolutely right. And it can spur other people's giving. And some people may be offended, and some people may say, okay, you just told me you need to raise $1 million, and you just asked me for a $250 gift. And I've been working at this company for a long time. I don't know how serious you are. I don't know how seriously I should take the fact that you're going to manage this project well. So people are thinking about that, right? And what is the worst thing that happens? You ask for a larger gift that someone can't afford? Absolutely. They come down. And we had another question or statement?
Yeah, I was just thinking about when you said ask for the right person.
Mm-hmm.
Before we got to the biblical examples, the first thing that came to my mind is you want those people who are going to be the biggest cheerleaders and advocates for your organization, because when they speak, that passion will be there, and people will know, hey, wait a minute, they're for real. This may be for real, so this may be something where I want to put my money, where I want to give my money. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I absolutely do.
And even when it comes to, now this is coming, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, even when it comes to, I come from the Baptist church, where it comes to where people says, well, you just have to give your 10%. You just have to give your tithe. And what always came to me is, how come everybody doesn't know where does the tithe go?
Well, and
people need to maybe people need to explain that. You know, that's from my perspective.
right.
Yeah,
And
and maybe that would help people to.
Right. Got it. You're absolutely right.
Yes.
You're absolutely right. Letting people know how tithe is used, and I think the reason she's bringing that up is for this reason. Oftentimes people think that because they've returned tithe, that all of your local church programs are taken care of, and all of our outreach for the church is taken care of. And that's not necessarily the case. So sometimes we do need to make sure that people understand, more importantly than where does the tithe go, which can get into another conversation. People don't recognize how the tithe is used to help a lot of churches that were growing churches, and then they become large churches. And we've all heard this. So, well, maybe we should just hold the tithe. But when they were a small church, they weren't necessarily saying that then, right? So we know why we believe in a systematic tithe. But the important thing from a fundraising perspective is letting people know about our needs. It's even less important, to be honest with you, to talk about the tithe or not having enough local budget, or why isn't the church giving more budget. People don't give because of that. They're giving to make an impact and an outcome. So you really want to spend 95% of your conversation on that topic. And if they go on a bunny trail, bring them back to that topic. Yes, ma'am.
I'm aggressive, so I never take no, but I give people options. Because I realize I'm not just after money, I'm after resources. There was one of our churches, they hadn't done VBS in about 6 years when we became members, but they kept saying they wanted to do this, and there were a lot of kids in the community. And how churches are, complain about each other. And so I gave each person I went to them, the large families on the board, and I said, you have 3 options. You can give me money, you can give me time, or you can give me resources. And I had a list of things the VBS needed.
Good.
We also had a bus they wanted to rent. So we got a school bus from the camp, and all they said they would give the gas, and I got one family to give the gas.
Got you.
There was one elder that never gave.
Right, so I hear you. I'm going to cut you off right here because I want to hear these stories, and I want you all to hear other people's perspectives, but I want to make sure we're covering as much material as possible. So thank you. I hear exactly what you're saying. You're saying make sure people have options and different ways to give. Absolutely. That could be done live. That could be done in letters. That's why you see oftentimes what we call a gift array. So there is a number, and then a $ blank for people to fill in an amount so they don't feel constrained by the numbers, right? That's why we do that, to give people an option of giving. And letting them know that there are volunteer options are absolutely important. Making sure that they understand that you need funds is critically important as well, though. Because if you have a lot of volunteers and no funds, there's going to be an issue. So yeah, the options are wonderful. So the right amount. And then at the right time. Sometimes people have sold businesses. Sometimes people have come into other funds. There may be some wrong times if the economy is going down and this person is a physician and they have an office, but the economy is really down. That might not be the best time to ask them for a large sum of money. So at the right time, and then for the right project. And we talked about aligning projects with values, because really, marketing is defined as an exchange of values. It's a values exchange, okay? And marketing is defined as a values exchange. And remember I said in fundraising, you're marketing, you're not really selling. So it's about values. So Michael Brown, tell me about yourself. I love to do a lot of work with Bible Bowl. I love working with the kids. Now, people that have kids programs are going, oh, he might be a prospect for some of the things that I'm doing because I'm running a mentoring program for the kids. Or, I've come into Adventism through Christian education when I was in college, left Xavier University in New Orleans and went to Oakwood. Oh, he might be interested in giving to the annual fund for X, Y, and Z. You see where I'm going? So we just want to make sure that we're well aware of what that right project may be, and you do that by having a conversation and having some options, as the young lady back there just mentioned. But we've got to plan all this stuff out. What's the big campaign idea? We're going digital, Facebook, YouTube, mobile app, Pinterest. What are you going to do in all these channels? I don't know. We'll figure that out later. This is kind of what happens a lot when we start just choosing tools and not moving forward and really thinking about what the strategy is. So this feels like a good point for us to think about a couple of different things. Now, we had some projects. Raise your hand if you talked about projects, because I want to just choose a couple of these projects. Okay. So we had a project here, and that project was education in Jamaica, right? So capital campaign as well as annual fund, right? So that's going to be this group talking, okay? And I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to start looking at goals and objectives because we have to be able to outline those. So we just want to go through a little exercise of outlining some goals and objectives. So as we're talking about this material right now, you guys think about that, education in Jamaica. And then here we had two projects, and remind me again, because I'm slipping now.
An elevator.
Elevator, I remember the capital campaign, yes, you're right, yes. And VBS and end of year gifts for kids. So up here, we're going to use the elevator, okay, because we've got another kind of church-related project in the back. So that'll be this group right here, right? Okay? And then, bad move. Okay? And then in the back, we had another project. Which one was that? Sorry, say that loudly. Oh, the after school, the wellness. The wellness. So this part of the room back here is going to be the wellness, right? Now, you could break into any of the groups that you want, but just kind of get the idea that back here we want you to generally be thinking about wellness and try and apply these principles that we're talking about. Think about the action steps you need to take, because this is what you're going to need to do for each of your nonprofits or projects that you're working on, right? Okay, so we've got wellness back here. We have the elevator in this area, so kind of capital. And we have the school and annual fund for the school in this area, right? So now, as we're starting to think through this then, we have goals and we have objectives. So the goal is the broader thing, right? The objective starts to bring down that goal, right? And we're starting from our mission, and I'm going to just assume, just for time's sake, that we have the mission already, that we already know why we exist, what we're doing. That's why I asked the question about the cause. And I'm going to assume that we know where we want to go, the vision, right? So we want to be able to move from these individual goals and talk about these objectives within each of these goals, right? So that we can meet our vision. Do you see what's happening in that strategic planning thing? This doesn't have to be like a 50-page document, right? Something simple that people are going to remember. Here's where we are. Our goals are to reduce the incidence of diabetes in the general area for the Wellness Center by X%. Some other goals. or to reduce the incidence. And we can get over here to our objectives. We're targeting this community to bring down the rate of diabetes by X%. Does that make sense? Sure. Okay, good. Because I want you to take a couple of minutes and I want you to just start talking amongst yourselves, and I want you to do two things. Think about the project that we've talked about, and then think about your own organization. So the first thing is, what broad goals might we be approaching? Take a couple of minutes and talk about that, okay, in those groups, okay? Think about what the goals may be. Yes?
My question, why the vision is placed after the objectives instead of the beginning?
That's a good question, because the mission tells us where we are right now, what we're doing, what the cause is that we're focusing on, why we're focusing on that cause. It's where we are now. The vision is where we would like to be as an organization later, or when this project is over. So in order to get from where we are right now to our vision of where we'd like to be in the future, we have to take some steps. And our goals are going to be these things. That tells us the direction we're heading in. And then from there, we've got to take some particular steps, some measurable things that we're going to be able to look back on, and we know whether or not we've met our goal by measuring these objectives. Does that make sense? So that's why this mission is after the objectives, because this is the end destination of where we're going. This is where we are now. Yes?
I'm not sure I understand the difference between the goal and the objective.
The goal is going to be broader. Like if I were to say, as an example, the goal is to decrease, the goal for the Jamaican project is to increase the number of children that have equal access to Seventh-day Adventist Christian education. So that's goal. And then the objective may be, yes, and the objective is more of the how as opposed to the why. And this is the measurable thing, right? We're going to increase the number of children in the after-school program by X%. We're going to establish a STEM program that enables the children to grow their science, technology, engineering, and mathematics skills. And we are going to have, we're targeting 50 children per year in this program. See the difference now? Yeah, so those are good clarifying questions, because especially when we get to the grant writing section, you'll see that you've got to have these things in the grant writing section. It's expected that you have it when you're fundraising overall. If you don't have these when you're writing the grant proposal, you don't really have a proposal, and it won't be funded. Okay, so is that kind of clear now? And I think if we start talking in groups, that's why I want us to do this little group discussion, and it takes some time to do that, because it's going to help you process, well, what are the goals for my organization? Or what could they be? What are the objectives? What could they be? Does that make sense? Okay. It's not going to be perfect, because we're just going to take a few minutes just because I want you to go through the exercise, but I'm going to let you go on ahead and start off with your goals. Okay, so I'm curious about, there we go. What was that project like, and what was that process like? Lots of discussion, interesting. It's kind of invigorating when you have a team, right? Could you imagine if you have to do that alone? Yeah, yeah. So this is the whole point when we start talking about fundraising being a team-oriented effort. I'm not going to spend a lot of time right now, but I do want to just hear very quickly one goal and tell me what the objectives are associated with that. Your major donor's about to walk away because they're like, okay, tick-tock, tick-tock.
All right, the mission is to increase the number of children.
And speak really loudly for the room. Oh.
The mission is to increase the number of children that have access to religious education. And by way of doing that, one of the goals would be to provide central air conditioning to create a comfortable environment in the city of Trenchtown in Kingston, Jamaica.
Great. And you could say, is it one air conditioning?
Central.
One central unit? One unit? Okay, because sometimes there are multiple units, so I'm not sure. Okay. Yeah, and that's why I'm bringing that point up, is that as you were going through, if there are multiple units that are needed, you'd want to make sure to add those sorts of things in. So good, 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 good. And
mission, the church and the school both have declining attendance.
mhm.
And the goal will be to make the building accessible to the community.
Good.
And the objective will be to install an elevator which would install a double door elevator which would accommodate wheelchairs and walkers.
Great, great. Excellent, excellent. So we'll keep going with this. And I think we had a wellness center back here, blue shirt back in the left. Yes.
All right, you want to know the goals?
Just one of the goals
Okay,
and one of the
goal
objectives.
is to reduce diabetes
Mhm.
in the population. We have a lot of also heart problems
Mhm.
and also weight gain. So we want to we're doing this program to do weight loss.
Great. And the goal, I mean the, I'm sorry, the objective? One objective? Measurable? Or we need to come back to that? Okay, no problem. And we had one on this side as well, right? Same. Okay, I'm missing one somewhere, I thought. Okay, good. Okay, so good. Yes. You were confused?
I don't know if anybody else was, but like, okay, with the project, if there's a, I don't know if I'm using the right term, goal of saying we need.
Mhm. If there's a goal of saying we need,
If there's a goal of saying we need $200,000 this year in order to accomplish what it is that we're trying to do, is that, am I using that term right? Is that your goal or is that an objective?
that is the fundraising goal, right? That's the fundraising goal. But here we're talking about strategic goals. So why we need that $200,000 fundraising goal.
So when you're doing strategic, you're not dealing with funds at all, you're dealing with what you're doing and how.
Yeah, we're really dealing with why are we doing it, what and how are we doing, and what is it going to take us to get there. That's where the donors are coming in because they're going to help make this project sustainable so that we can meet our vision. Okay? Okay? So good, good. So when we're going through a development cycle then, in general, and I know that was very quick, but at least now you've got an idea of what sorts of things you would probably want to flesh out as you're developing the plan. We start out with a strategic plan with the mission, goals, and objectives, and then we move forward because really our fundraising is supporting that strategic plan. And then we build our case for support. And we'll talk about the case for support. It's basically why give and why give now, right? Why give and why give now? This is what people are giving to after they've heard this or seen this, been exposed to this. This is when they're giving the case for support. It's the most important thing. So if we can't articulate our case well, we're going to have a very hard time raising any funds or getting any additional support, whether that's volunteer support or anything else. And in those cases then, I'm not going to worry about all these fancy words, but let me just tell you, the case resources, those are just the things you need to make the case. Testimonials, pictures, statistics, the case statements, and the reason I have an S on there is that we may make more than one case statement based upon different groups. Maybe an alumni group would want to have X, Y, or Z, or people that have been serviced by your wellness center and have done well, maybe they would want to hear a different reason to support, right? So we can have multiple case statements, and the case expression is just, think of it as communications. How are you communicating it? Website, pamphlets, letters, phone scripts, all those sorts of things, face-to-face conversations. Then we want to validate the case for support, usually not as much really in annual programs, but definitely in capital campaign programs. You want to validate it to make sure that what you think you're communicating is being received. And that's where we get into feasibility studies and looking at the message testing if we want to do that. And we'll talk about feasibility studies in a little while. And then we get into the fund development plan. So that's when we're getting our fundraising strategy. That's when we're engaging in the strategy. That is where we're having an engagement strategy, how we get people involved so that they can experience what we're doing. That's where we get into the marketing communication strategy. How are we going to tell people what we're doing? When are we going to tell them what we're doing? How many times are we going to touch people with these messages? Because we need to repeat messages in order for it to stick. That's why when you look at commercials, then those commercials will run over a certain period of time, a certain number of times, because advertisers understand you need repeated exposure, right? And then we get into campaign infrastructure. How are we going to organize in order to be successful? From there, we move into the actual campaign and think about, well, what is the campaign name? If we're developing a campaign, if we need to do that, planning any events, and then inviting support. Now do you see why I said there are all these things that happen before we get to the ask, which is inviting support? So there are a lot of ways to get people involved in the fundraising process, but you kind of have to let them know where they could fit in very easily. After the ask is made, then recognition. We've got thank yous, public thank yous, leadership invitations, etc. This is the development process for any type of project that we're doing. Is that process clear, or do you have any questions on that overarching view? Yes.
Would it be appropriate to use social media in this?
Would it be appropriate to use social media in this type of fundraising?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And after we know what we're doing, we could think about what tools to use.
Okay.
Right? And social media may be one of those tools. The first part of that, the first word was what? Social. So when I talked about engagement, right? That's really what we're doing, right? We're trying to rally a community, get a community on board with a message, get them excited about something. If you're asking, is that going to bring in the best place to make an ask? Then I would tell you, no, actually, it's not the best place to make an ask. Important? Absolutely. Can you make it? Absolutely. If you build your whole ask on a social media campaign, you're going to have an issue. There's definitely going to be an issue. But it's got a place. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I just want to make sure that I get the case statement correct and the case expressions.
Yes. And we're going to talk more about the case statement. But the case statement is basically saying, why should I give and why now? Okay? We're trying to help children to excel in X, Y, or Z. Right? And here's how we're going to do that. But we'll break that down a little bit more. The case is why give. The resources just means, and I don't want you to get too hung up in these words. I just put them here so that if you hear them, you have a working understanding of what it is. But the real important thing is that you're able to articulate a case, right? No matter what you call this other stuff. If you say testimonials, that's fine. Somebody else may say, oh, where are your case resources? Only a professional fundraiser is going to use that term, right? But that would be things like photos, interviews, statistics that you have, testimonials that people are giving, all of those sorts of things, right? Stories about impact, resources. You constantly build those case resources, because if you don't, you won't have strong support for your case statement, right? Okay. And I see your hand right there in the back. And then, so our case statements, we're going to actually have a statement, which is basically a sound bite, right? And that's what those case statements are. And then we've got case expressions, and that just means, how do I tell people, how do I express this case to people? That's just the communications, okay? The communications, letters, pamphlets, ads on web, the website itself, etc. Yes, sir, in the yellow tie? Yes.
Yes, this is very interesting, insightful, because I'm insightful here, and I was just wondering if I hear you clarifying it now, but do you have any further documentation, either in the book or outside of the book, that talks about this particular cycle? Because this is something, as far as I'm concerned, is useful, that we can go and plan and follow.
Yeah, that's a great question. Really, this whole thing that we're talking about right now is this cycle. I'm just doing it in bite-sized chunks as we walk around. The second thing, and yes, there is more information in the presentation as well on each of these topics, but this book, which is a different color than the book you have, the content is going to be very similar. So this book, The Successful Fundraising Guide, that's exactly why we rewrote this. Did you all have a chance to review this at all? Okay, that's okay. So I'm going to reference certain chapters in here by title and chapter so that you just know that and you can kind of cross-reference, but this is another way of getting to that content. And then a final way of getting to that content is also through the Adventist Learning Community. And you probably want to write that down. Adventist Learning Community. Okay? And if you put that into Google, then when you get to the home page for the Adventist Learning Community, type in the keyword where it has the magnifying glass, type in the keyword philanthropy. Okay? The keyword is going to be philanthropy. When you do that, a course is going to come up that has, I think, over 35 videos in it that covers a lot of the same material as well in different ways. Okay? So 3 different ways to attack that. Okay? And a couple of things that I want to mention here. The ask. The reason we spent time on making sure that we were going to be more comfortable with the ask or figure out our comfort level in making the ask is this. What do you think the number one reason is that people don't give? Because they were not asked. It's the number one by research. They haven't given. It absolutely is biblical. They didn't ask. Number 2, what do you think is the number one reason that people don't give again? Go here. No connection, no follow-up. All of those things are important. Credibility. No one asked again. Not specific. Those are all important things. What's the last step in that cycle? They didn't get a thank you is the number one reason that they don't give again. Number one, not saying thank you. And that can be a real danger when we're working in the church, especially because oftentimes we'll say, well, you're a member of this congregation and this is our project, so you should. No, right? The thank you is very important. So don't skip that step. It's not a trivial step, and it's something easily that you can assign someone to. Now, I could have showed you this a little bit earlier, but I wanted you to think through some of this first so that what you're going to do is then go back and refine what you've already done. So the mission statement, it's kind of philosophical, and what I want to key on is it's where the organization is today, right? Talks a little bit about our core values, right? It's dealing with why the organization exists, right? This is the first step. Remember, we had that bullet. Mission was the first step when I looked through the development cycle on page 17 in your book, right? That's the first piece. So great mission statements give potential donors a means of identifying and connecting. That's why it's out there, to help people connect with the organization, to identify, to understand that, this is relevant for us, right? Which is on page 18 of your book. So here's an example of a mission statement I had pulled. The mission of Action Healthy Kids is to engage diverse organizations, leaders, and volunteers in actions that foster sound nutrition and good physical activity in children, youth, and schools, right? Now, I could strengthen it a little. The things that we listed, we talked about values and all that other stuff that I had listed on page 17. Action of Healthy Kids believes that all youth, now we're inserting our beliefs, right? Believes that all youth deserve a healthy lifestyle. Because we care about the health and wellness of children, Action of Healthy Kids does what? They provide sound nutrition, education, and fun physical activity for school-age children nationwide, right? So you'll have an example where you can kind of go through and you see what I'm going to say. Go back and check against just that short list on page 17, just to see if your mission is really performing as a mission. Yes, ma'am.
Are you saying that our mission statement for the project should be different from the mission statement for the church?
Oh, absolutely. That is a wonderful question, a wonderful question. Because unless the church is the project, which is, expanding the gospel of Christ or spreading the gospel of Christ, but you want those mission statements to be unique and specific and different. So if the church 5 blocks away can say the same thing, you don't really have a good mission statement. You're talking about your cause, right? It's specific and it's driven down. In marketing, we would call it a point of differentiation, right? A relevant point of differentiation. Why is this different and why does it matter to me, right? So even when we have generic things like drinks and you think Coca-Cola and Pepsi and Sprite and all these other things, right? They're all sugar water, right? Basically, sugar and water. But behind that, they're promising some other things, right? It's about this generation, or it's about life, or it's about... That's what's happening with our statement, right? When we're talking about our mission, we're saying, look, Michael, I know you're going to be interested in the work that we're doing and you want to become part of this work because here's where our values intersect. This is what's important. This is what we're delivering on, okay? Our goals, then, are general statements of accomplishment, and they talk about the what the nonprofit does, right? And desired outcomes. And so those things are measurable, and we've spent some time on that. Sample goals would be to help youth achieve happy, healthy lives. Is that statement alone really measurable? No. To raise awareness and adoption of healthy living. To encourage children to build healthy self-images through fitness, education, and practice. See how it's a general kind of, we see what direction you're heading in? Okay. But our objectives should be SMART objectives. So they're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, results-oriented, and time-dependent, right? SMART goals are what we always want to have. And that's why I kept going back to, you'll know if you're on track with your goals based upon your measurements of your objectives. Because they're going to specifically measure some things that we're saying we can achieve and we're promising to achieve. And we're telling people what those results are, and we're telling them in what time period we're doing those ideally, right? So when you refine your goals for your real projects, make sure they're SMART goals, okay? Is that good? Sample objectives, to offer a monthly 2-hour low-carb cooking class that helps reduce the incidence of diabetes. And I could even have said by X%, right? Or offering X number of classes, right? To conduct a half-day Eating for Optimum Health symposium for 50 attendees quarterly, right? To sponsor a 3-month, 30-minute boot camp supporting an annual Biggest Loser Team Challenge. Do you see how these things are really specific? I mean, people don't walk away going, okay, what are you going to do? They're saying, tell me more about how you're going to do this and how I can help to move forward. So this is what we're talking about with the objectives, okay? And so you have examples of those objectives and goals when you're looking at pages 20 and 21, okay? Donors fund great missions and they make significant investments in powerful visions. In other words, when you're talking about a major gift, you're talking about a large donation, something way bigger than you're used to getting. The average donation in the United States is $20 to $25. When you're talking about a major gift, what's major? Hey, for some organizations, major may be a $500 gift. From some organizations that I've dealt with, I started their major gifts at $10,000. For university, that probably really isn't even a major gift. That's a mid-major gift. A major gift may be $50,000 and above, right? It all kind of matters. For most of this group, I would bet that major probably is going to be somewhere around $500 or $1,000 and above, okay? Those people are investing, and we opened up talking about that. So if I look at a true cycle and say, what's the fundraising process? Just kind of boiling it down, we start with identification, where we look at linkage, ability, and interest, and I'm going to get into those. Then cultivation, where we're looking at involvement as well. We get into solicitation, and we talk about different ways to solicit. And then recognition, which was on that other site. The reason I'm bringing this up is that this is just another way to look at it. If you're more linear in thought, then it's another way to look at that process. But we're talking about linkage. And what do we need? What do you think we might mean when we're saying linkage? I used that term earlier when we were talking when we first started. How does it connect to the community? Kind of, because now I'm thinking about identifying prospective donors. So the giver, yes, the giver, right? But it absolutely has to be relevant. And what you're talking about, how does this connect to the community, is both in interest, and that should be the interest of the community as well as the interest of the individual donor, right? Okay, so we've got linkage. And then we have to have a linkage. And I gave you some examples of where people have asked for names of prospects and there's no linkage, right? They need to have the ability to give. Someone mentioned doing research in the center. The young lady said, you know, you should research and get a good idea of how much people may be able to give, right? That's ability. Some of that research may be just talking in a small group, having a conversation that you wouldn't be ashamed to have if they were sitting there with you, talking about them in that way, not as though they're ATMs, right? Right? And then interest, and we talked about projects aligning. These three things formally in fundraising, we'll say that these are the three drivers of whether or not people are going to give. What's their linkage? What's their interest? What's their ability? So we start out with something like this, which I know is mouse print all the way in the back of the room, and it's probably mouse print right here. Yeah. Oh, actually, this was going to be an example, so we didn't even have it in. But this is all that's what's happening here. Remember before when I gave an example, I said, oh, we're talking about the core, the smallest core of who is there. You think about that for your organization. This is to identify people. Yeah, this one's not in the book. But there's no magic in what's here. The construct is what I want you to get, which is there's an inner circle. And think about who's in an inner circle. If you just want to list something out, but your inner circle should be different than this. Board is right here, the church board. Then I've got major donors, right? People that have given very large sacrificial gifts previously. And I've got management right here, okay? So we've got board, management, major donors. And then our next realm outside of that is we've got volunteers and employees and current donors and members, churches and other groups. So this is a very general process, right? And then we've got former participants in our program, and we've got former donors and former board members, which I really would normally think of as being probably in this circle as opposed to out here. But again, there's no magic in how this is listed, right? The whole thought is to think through who's closest to the organization and think about it in a couple of different rings. And then the next is the outside universe. So now you could imagine why I might have an issue with someone that calls me and says, excuse me, can you give me a list of philanthropists in the Adventist Church? How close are they to the organization? Yeah, they're not close at all, right? How close are they to the individual that's going to be doing the ask? No relationship at all, right? So you can see there's an issue. Now you can also understand why if you've called my office and you said, you know, we really want to know which local businesses we can get money from. And this is the classic thing that I hear. You know, our church, you know, we're struggling and, you know, we're trying to make a local budget and we need to fundraise and we need $1 million. But, you know, we need to go from outside the church. So you're saying you're going to skip all of these close relationships, all these people that should care the most about what's going on, and we're going to start here. I don't even play the game. I just tell people right then, I'm going to be really honest with you. I'm a straight shooter. You are not going to make your goal if that's the way you try to do it. You've got to start from the inside. And these folk don't have to be giving huge gifts. Only the major donors were giving huge gifts, right? Right? The point of some of this is just to get people on the donor file so that you can continue to cultivate relationships before you need a major gift like that. Does that make sense? So, this is one of those things that's not kind of trivial. What I want you to do is to get in your groups again literally for 5 minutes, and I want you to think through what are the types of groups that you need to be thinking about here. Why? Because you probably will want to ask various people to focus on these different segments. Like someone probably would focus on a board campaign to fundraise from the board. Someone would probably focus on volunteers or other groups that can be out here, vendors and that sort of thing. Someone would probably focus on former participants. Do you see where we're going with the fundraising team? So now we're not just asking them in general to give. Some people come from a business background, they're going, you know what, I think I could work on this. I could work on some in-kind gifts instead of cash gifts, gifts of other things for you with local corporations, and I'll figure out which of those corporations there are. That's the purpose of this step, okay? Without this step, there is no program, no real fundraising program, okay? So just take 5 minutes and get in your groups and draw these circles, just a couple of circles. You don't need all these other lines, just a couple of circles, and brainstorm who should be in this prospect pipeline. Does that make sense? Is everybody clear? Okay, let's do that. And we're starting now. 5 minutes. So that's what you'll do, right? You just draw something really simple like that and just start filling them in. Nothing fancy, it doesn't matter. That's what you'll do when you have your own organization. And then the second step is I want you to take those names that you would have listed in here, because right now we listed groups, right? Within those groups then, you'd want to break those down into specific names, right? Whether they were businesses or individuals, right? And we could list those names here, right? In something very simple, right? And that's not in here, so just list it out. There's nothing fancy about this. This is just an Excel spreadsheet. You can do this on a sheet of paper. It doesn't really matter. But you want to have their name. You want to have the linkage. What do you think would be in the linkage column? Relationship. Yeah, well, how are they linked to the organization? And who they're linked to, right? Right? Because ideally, we want a name here so that we can move forward with those folk, right? Then in here, we want to look at, and we want to think about interest. These are the same letters that we had on that the gray chart, right, where I talked about linkage, interest, and ability, right? We want to think about interest. You could think of it in terms of high, medium, and low interest. You could think of those in terms of numbers. If you're more analytic and you like to have numbers and you want to use numbers, use numbers. It doesn't really matter. The whole point is that you're segmenting people because you have to start with the people with the highest interest, right? And then we look at ability and we do the same thing. What's their ability to give? Is it high, medium, or low? Can they give a really large gift? Can they give a medium-sized gift? Or do we think that they might be able to give us a general gift, which is going to be helpful for us as well? Now, for analytic people, if you were using numbers here, then you could take those numbers and just decide what you want as high, medium, and low for the numbers. You could use 1, 2, and 3. It doesn't have to be fancy. And 1, 2, and 3, right? And then you can just multiply those out and you get a total score for the donor, right? And you could sort that list by donor score. For people that don't want to be that analytic, that's not a problem. As long as you know, look, we're working on people that are high in interest. So I my column, so it would be high interest and then high ability. That's fine too.
Could you repeat that point about wanting more analytical?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that I tend to like numbers and things, right? And so but I'm math and computer science, right? And finance and marketing as a master's. So I like numbers. So I would put numbers in here, right? I would put scores in here probably from 1 to 10, right? When I'm ranking these. Or if I wanted to really make it easy, that's why we're saying you could use something like a 1, 2, and a 3. And I could do the same thing here, right? Deciding that my 1s would be my lowest, my 2s and my 3s would be my highest, because I want my highest number to be the high people, right? So that when I multiply this times this number and I get a number out here, I know that the highest numbers that I get are the people that I want to visit first in those segments. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Explain again the linkage?
Absolutely. Yes. And so what goes under linkage is two things, and you could break that into 2 columns really if you wanted to. But linkage, we're going to say, how are they linked to the organization? They were previously served by our ACS group. They have done fundraisers with us before. They are a vendor of the church. They are a board member, those sorts of things. But I also want to know who is linked with them. So my end goal is I'd like to have a name here so that I can ask them if they would be part of the ask team, because we'll probably send 2 people out when you're doing face-to-face asks, right? So if they'll be part of the ask team, they may say, yeah, I have a linkage with them, but I'll do anything for you, but I'm not asking for money. I say, that's great, because you know what? Opening the door for us to be able to have the conversation, if you would just call them and tell them that we want to just come and talk to them about this project and why the project's important to you, that's great. Have them do that, and then someone else can actually make the ask, right? So those are the 2 things we want in here. How are they linked to the organization? How are they linked to the people that are doing the ask? Okay? This isn't in your handout. This one I'm going to tell you to do, or take a picture of it. But from the back of the room, you may not be able to. But just to simply draw that, this is a donor pyramid. This is what's really happening in fundraising overall. We start at the bottom of this pyramid, where we have occasional projects and events that we're doing, like golf tournaments or all those little sales that we talked about. That's at the bottom of the pyramid. As we go up this pyramid, people are more engaged, and they're usually giving a higher average gift, okay? So we start here, and we're going, okay, great. Am I saying never have an event? No. Am I saying that an event is not the best way to fundraise? I'm absolutely saying that, because I'm telling you the amount of time and money to host an event. If you put that into traditional fundraising and did all these other things, it's not real fun necessarily. A lot more money, and someone mentioned on this side, I think, return on investment. You'd have a lot more return on investment on your marketing dollar by doing that, okay? But what are events good for? Building community, getting people involved, engaging, injecting an element of fun, all of those sorts of things. That's what we'd use this for. What else is it good for? To be able to get people onto the annual donor file to give to you to help support the annual fund, the thing that keeps the organization going. The thing that generally is hard to fundraise for, like how are we going to pay for the electricity that's in here, and we're running the air conditioner, and we've got to pay for the programs, right? That's the annual fund. So we want to get these people to at least give here, and the people that we get here, we want to actively continue to grow the relationship with the annual donors to those that are highly valued or loyal donors. Those are people that are giving multiple gifts in a year, because if people give multiple gifts in a year, you look at organizations, 80% of their funds outside of the major donors, 80% of their funding usually comes here, right? So I was talking with someone up here, and I said, here's the thing. You have very high, you have high attrition. You lose a lot of donors. So if you have 10 donors that you bring onto a file, onto your donor file, you're going to retain 4 of those on average. 6 out of 10 of those people are going to leave again. And we talked about some of the reasons that they leave, right? Yes. Yeah, you guys enumerated those for us. And so now you can see why it's very important to keep them on the file, because one thing, they start giving, and what I hadn't mentioned is that their average gift is also much higher, right? And so if we can get into things like electronic funds transfers, EFTs, then we find that our retention rate goes up even more and gets into the 80% retention rate, right? So now the numbers are kind of reversed, right? And they're doing it. Now they still have to be maintained, right? Still sending them thank yous, still letting them know what's going on, not just taking them for granted because they're giving, right? Now I'm going to push the pause button and say, this is where when I was doing stewardship, I think I've shared with all of you all that I'm a layperson. I led stewardship for Southwest Region Conference and did the training there just because I was passionate about stewardship. And I said, this is where our churches oftentimes fall down. Because what happens, people that they need to return a faithful tithe. Someone mentioned it out there, but people don't understand how the tithe is used. People talk about it sometimes, people still don't really understand how the tithe is used. Same thing happens with local church budget, if we're honest. So we say, oh, we'll give to this budget, and oftentimes it's a combined budget, right? Just give this per combined percentage. And then the person walks away not having any validation. The gift is being used, not what and how their donations have helped that thing, right? All of those are retention measures that we need here. So again, being a church, we can't afford to just say, okay, well, you know, you should return a faithful tithe and give a liberal free-willed offering and walk away with that. That doesn't work for a nonprofit organization. We want to migrate these people up then. Those are the people that we want to talk to about becoming major donors, right, to the organization and doing planned gifts, writing us into the wills, those sorts of things, right? So you see the purpose of this pyramid, this donor pyramid is what it's called? We're trying to migrate people up, step by step, up this pyramid. That means we're building stronger and stronger relationships and giving them more and more reasons to believe so that we can migrate them up that pyramid. That's the goal. If the goal is just, well, we just need to raise X amount of money, let's just see if we can get a couple of major donors. And so a lot of people will go through and they have, even with schools, academies, I can tell you, oftentimes you'll have 5 to 10 people that are supporting the school really and truly. Right? They're bringing in the lion's share of the funds. So what happens when that one person gets mad? What happens if that one person decides, you know, I'm really doing everything here. Maybe you should just do everything that I'm telling you to do. Right? Diversification, right? We need to diversify. We need to. So you need all of these people, even the people that could only give, let's say, $20 or $30. That's fine. If it's a sacrificial gift, God has seen it the same as any other gift, right? And if it's sacrificial here and not here, from a stewardship perspective, you know how he looks at that anyway. So enough said with the pause. That's where we're going. Yes, ma'am.
If we have, let's say our structure and we're doing, we have increased in our funding and, you know, on an annual basis.
Uh-huh.
Do we take that and invest as well? Or?
If you have raised funds, annual funds, can you invest those funds? Churches do that right now. That's why it's sitting in bank accounts, et cetera. So they can do those things. Here's the key. And there's a section in your book that says legal, right? And ethics also are covered in there. Legally, you have to use the funds as they were allocated. Now, I'm going to repeat that again. Legally, and remember I told you board members are responsible from a legal perspective. Legally, we have to use those funds as we raise them. If they're going to be used in a different way, you have to ask the people to do that. So if you go and you're saying, look, we need to raise funds for the bus, and then you go, oh, praise God, we've raised enough funds for the bus. Now we're going to take the rest of these funds to do, that's called a restricted gift. You've restricted it. You've said that they're raising for this. They gave you for this. Now you need to go back and tell them, okay, we've raised enough money and we want to move on. So a better way to do something like that is to raise for the annual fund and say, this will cover things like, and you list those things out, right? But people really aren't giving, by and large, so that monies would be invested. They're giving to make an impact in a life right now. Now, there is a certain type of fundraising where that does happen, and people always ask about it. What is that called? Does anyone know? What is that? An endowment. An endowment. And in an endowment, that's where they're doing exactly what you're talking about. Look, I'm going to give funds, and I know that the majority of that, in excess of 90% of it, is going to be placed into an investment account and is going to be reinvested over and over again. And I want the institution or the organization to be able to live off of that on an ongoing basis. Now, that means that you probably have somewhere between 5 and 7% of that actually doing work in the community. People that are in for, like, especially for types of needs, are sacrificial gift, and they're trying to get rid of the risk of it being lost on a crazy project. For a school, it's different. They're going, I'm trying to maintain the ongoing stability of the school. But even in that case, if they didn't have a strong annual fund, they're not going to have an endowment fund. And so where the issue usually comes is people ask about the endowment fund, and I say, how is your annual fund? And they go, well, and I'm going, well, you're not going to have an endowment fund to be realistic, and you probably need this more than you need the endowment fund, right? We hear about it with universities a lot, right? You know, Harvard's endowment is, you know, and those sorts of things. That's after an annual fund, okay? Clear? Okay. On your, you could brainstorm how to get people involved in these different lists. We're not going to worry about that. This is just an example that's there, so you're not going to see that. But we do want to get to this. When we're looking at fundraising, the other one you actually have the slide earlier. It's just repeated and saying use this as an example. Okay. So when we look here on page 12, then we're saying, okay, how much money is raised in the U.S.? $373 billion. We'll get new numbers this summer for 2016. Those numbers should be out then. But this is done by Indiana University, really through Giving USA at Indiana University within their fundraising school, the Lilly School. And it just shows how things are allocated. You know, by segment, religion is about 32% of all donations. Education, 15%. Human services like feeding people, providing health care, all those sorts of things, meeting the needs of people, 12%. Gifts to foundations, 11%, like community foundations, et cetera. Health, 8%. It'd be more like hospitals and that sort of thing. Public society benefits, 7%. Arts and culture, 5%. We hear a lot about that, but that's 5%, right? Environment, you hear a lot about this really by one organization. That's 4%, right? For animals, sorry, there we go, okay, sorry, 3% here. For the animals, that was 4% for international. And then individuals, about here, that's giving directly to an individual. So the lion's share is given where? To the church. Now, that's pretty impressive, right? Now, if we looked at these same numbers in the early 80s, this graph would have been even more impressive because it would have been 50% or a little bit more. So do you see what's happening? What am I saying is happening? People are giving less to religious causes now, to church, right? Churches, synagogues, all that stuff, right? To religion. They're giving less to that. If you think about that, then you should be asking, why are they giving less? And as they're giving less, what I want you to take away from this is why it's critically important to do that planning that I talked about up front and not just jump into doing an ask. And to make sure that we're following those process steps all the way through, right? Yes, sir. Do they trust less in churches? Well, you know, they don't measure, I haven't seen a research study that has measured trust itself, but I will say because we're giving the most to religion of the institution, I would say this is where we feel the most trustworthy. And there are some other things that drive this too, right? Because you're in church as an Adventist, probably pretty close to 52 weeks a year. So you have 52 opportunities to hear an affirming message for giving and the mission moving forward. So that helps as well, right? What it is saying is that people are voting with their pocketbooks. And for some reason, they're not giving, and you've got to tease that out. Is it less relevant, feel less relevant to people than it did before? Is it a trust issue? Is it they feel like that there's a generic thing that's happening? They feel like the money is not really being utilized to move things forward in the way, and you kind of have to tease that out. So there's no good reason that we know in general as to why that has shrunk. But what most professionals will say is, most fundraising professionals will say that this is because we need to do a much better job at making our case for support and supporting it on an ongoing basis. Okay. Yes, sir.
Growing statistical reports that there are more people who are becoming non-religious and also people who are becoming spiritual but not religious. And my guess is that people start voting with their pocketbooks before they actually take that step.
Absolutely. And I think that is, that is perfect, and I love that you brought that up. You're absolutely right. A lot of the Barna research shows that diminishing in nature of America becoming less and less of a Christian nation or even a religious nation. And at one point I had seen some statistics. I haven't been on top of them here recently, but at one point it was actually Satanism that was outpacing everything else in certain areas. So work we're doing is important, but you're absolutely right. You can get a good sense right up front when you start looking at local budget especially. Because I always tell people is when I do stewardship, which I do for NAD now, but when I did stewardship, I would always tell people whether or not people are philanthropic, it's not the tithe. Because tithe is returned. So it's never been yours anyway. You look at local budget, and when we look at our local budget numbers, everyone in here probably knows what happens with that local budget, that it tends to be suffering. So we wanted to understand also where people give, and what types of people give or organizations give. Where do the funds really come from? And the majority actually comes from where? Individuals. So when the first question is, can you tell me a foundation? Can you tell me about a company that, can't we do a planned giving, which is still individuals? I'm going, well, 71%, and it's usually between 70 and 80% historically over time, over like 50 years of tracking, this has been the largest group. And the interesting thing is, as a sidebar, if we drop this 71% in half of those donations come from households, not individuals, households that make $55,000 or less. And we're still talking about $373 billion, right, times 71%, times 50%. That's how much is coming out of here, right? By individuals, everyday individuals, like most people that I assume are sitting in this room. Okay? So it's not about a silver bullet. So this is important to remember. It's also important to remember individuals because when we talk about bequests, those are all individuals, usually, well, mostly, right? Most people haven't set up a formal estate, right? And so that, by and large, that's individual giving too. It just looks different. And a lot of this is different. Remember I mentioned the Lilly bequests are planned giving. That's giving in life insurance and would you write us in the will? Would you remember us in your last will and testament? Sorts of things. So legacy giving is what you may hear sometimes with that too, or you may hear in the church planned giving, or you'll hear trust services. All of those things mean the same thing. It's usually post-death. How are you remembering an organization? And foundations, a lot of these are individual foundations. Bill and Melinda, these individuals have a foundation. It's not Microsoft Foundation, right? Foundation. The Lilly School that I talked about, they have a Lilly Foundation. Eli Lilly, that huge pharmaceutical company, but it's not the company's foundation, right? So you can have a company foundation. I worked for the Dallas Morning News and was Director of Marketing Solutions there. We had a foundation. It was the Belo Foundation. And that came from the family's name. The Belos were funding that. It wasn't the Dallas Morning News or any of those other news outlets that were associated. So a lot in individual giving. Okay? And I've talked through that. We'll just leave you with those statistics. And I just kind of threw this in. No, that one's not in your handout, but I would say, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Don't overlook the everyday person sitting on the pew. Okay? You never know who these folk know, right? So essentials in making a case. We are now at, 26, thank you. So when we're making the case, we want to think about what the motivations for giving are. It may be by association because we're part of the group. We're part of this church, and this ACS group is part of this church association, or because they identify with a cause. I mentioned Bible Bowl and mentioned the sorts of things that I would support knowing that. I could tell you that I became Adventist through Bible study. So when Wycliffe Bible Translators was one of my clients, you think I was pretty engaged with them? Yeah, because of my identification with the cause. They still call me asking me things, and I'm not even working on that account anymore. Ask to give. And I mentioned that that's the number one reason that people give. That they assume that they have the expected capacity. So when I did a primary research study for some very, very large clients outside of the Adventist Church, and it was at the point at which the market was really crashing. And so everyone was saying, is our major donor program going to crash? What's going to happen with our planned giving? All of those sorts of things. And as we did the study, what I found out was that the donors were saying, oh no, I'm going to continue to give because I feel that the Lord has blessed us in these times. And so I have been given this capacity to give. Warren Buffett talks about that same sort of thing if you ever track what he's saying, right? And the group that he's pulled together, Mark Zuckerberg and and that entire group. Accepted capacity. Because of positive role models. We've seen it where funds are raised in the name of a particular person that's been influential, a principal, a conference president, a evangelist, because of the outcomes, just the outcomes that they're going to have, and they want to make a positive impact. Because they understand that it's an urgent need that needs to be met, right? Or because of circumstances. I'm Latin American, and I believe in helping kids move forward. In particular, why? Because I identify because I'm Latin American, something like that, right? So these things are important, and it's not a throwaway. When you're making your messages, think about whether or not your message is being filtered through one or a couple of these. And make sure you're shaping messages through these things, right? That you're talking in those ways. And so when you're making the case, the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to say, okay, well, what problem are we trying to solve? And then what are the outcomes that are going to come up? What are our values in the solution? And this is why I've mentioned the so what. When I say why give and why now, that's kind of the so what, right? And what difference will it make if the donor gives? These are all the things that need to be formed in order to successfully make a case statement, which moves us right into what we're going to talk about next, which is, the exercise we're going to do right now, which is making a case, right? So I want you to get back in your groups, and I want you to think about the case statement. And when you think about that case statement, well, actually, we don't even need, I'm not going to refer to the book. I want you to make the case for support. I want you to say why they should give, why now, what impact is it going to make? Why they should give, why now, and what impact will it make, right? So I'm going to let you break into your groups, and I want you to take about 22, we're going to 45. Let me get you to take about 5 minutes to talk through that, and we're going to take about 5 minutes to hear what these case statements are, okay? Just 5 minutes. We're 15 minutes before lunch where we can recharge, and before we recharge, we want to very briefly hear your draft case for supports, because obviously you haven't had enough time to really work on it. That could be done over a couple of weeks, really, right? But we're just going through the process so we know what it feels like to do it, right? So with that, we're going to ask for the mic from the back, but I'm going to let you use this for now.
Before we give you a presentation. The why now that you're asking for, does it relate specifically to the project that we're working on, or it relates to the overall mission?
That's a good question. And because we're fundraising for the project, sorry about that. Because we're I can't even do it. I've got this thing on. Thank you. Because we're fundraising for the project itself, then we're talking about the why on the project. If you were fundraising for the organization's annual fund, then you'd be talking about the cause, and the list of projects that you're working with. Okay, so why project?
The why on our project is to enhance and enrich the lives of children who will become educated, productive members of society who will change the world, thereby reducing crime and increasing numbers for God's kingdom.
Okay. And remind us what we're fundraising for again? What's the project you were thinking about? For the air conditioning?
One is central air conditioning in one school, providing materials for building, for building cold at another school, and a third school to be built.
Okay. Okay.
And they're religious schools.
Okay, and this case for support is for what project? For which one of those?
The support for the project that we're working on right now, that we want to be done right now, which we are writing this proposal for, is for us to get the air conditions into the school that needs air conditions, and another school who needs equipment, stove, and a functioning kitchen and water supply.
Okay.
To be qualified for September opening of school.
Okay, and so now with that in mind, read that case for support one more time, please.
To enhance and enrich the lives of children who will then become educated, productive members of society who will change the world, thereby reducing crime.
In order to give them the facility that they need in the school to be ready for September opening.
Okay, good. And if you had more time to work on that, then you probably would also land on things like the value of Christian education and how that helps to shape and mold future leaders, and that you want to provide a state-of-the-art facility to be able to do that, right? Including things like, and you would list out what those needs are. Do you see where we're going now, where we're starting with something that's a little more broad, and then we bring it into focus slowly, like we're focusing the camera? So good, and there's not enough time in here to do that, right? And we know that, So good. And our next one is right here in the front, yes. And remind us what the project is, just quickly.
The project is to install an elevator.
Okay, great.
Why give? To improve access to the building by making the project possible now. Why now? Because the seniors, the children, of the community need access now. What impact will it make? The building will be more easily accessible to all, and it will improve community involvement by contributing to the health, the mental and spiritual welfare of individuals in the community.
Okay, great. And as with the code you're saying, it also needs to come up to code, which is a critical thing for a business to be able to keep running. So it shows the urgency, and that's why you're emphasizing that for them. Right, good. And oh yes.
I mean, there's one critical thing that you could have added to that, which would definitely be, most people who don't donate would be, is to make it ADA compliant.
Yes.
I mean, that.
And what is that? What's ADA? American Disabilities Act?
American Disabilities Act. That is not just state compliant, but that is, a lot of people donate to disability.
Mm-hmm. So this project, thank you for adding that. So this project could be a project for disabilities ministries along with other ministries, Silver Wisdom or whatever we want to call that, right? Something that focuses on the elderly. And that can be, we may need this elevator because we need to be able to increase the ability of our membership and visitors to be able to come here. We may be doing some things in church that we visitors too, invite them too, but we can't because we live in an area that has X% of people that are elderly or X% of the people have disabilities, and we want to be able to reach those, and to better reach those needs and to bring them in so that we can give them these sorts of programs, we need to be able to get them up into the building, right? So the same sorts of things you all are talking about now, we're just kind of as a group adding a little bit more, and that's what you want to do with your cases, right? You're going to kind of write that, and you're going to put it down, and you're going to pick it up, and you're going to talk to people about it, and get their feedback, and just let them talk. Don't defend it. Just let them talk. You know, tell them what you've said, and then see how they respond. Because that's what's going to happen as we're talking to donors, right? Exactly. Okay, so great job. Good. And we had another that we're working on where? The Wellness Center?
So the problem that we're aiming to address is the increased percentage of members in the Chicago community with diabetes and associated disorders. And the way that we're going to address this is providing education, practical opportunities, and accountability for individuals that want to participate with us in improving their health. And the reason we want to do this right now is because this center is providing proactive health care resolutions as opposed to other centers in the area that are more reactive. And we're responding immediately to the healthcare bill that's happening in the United States so that people understand that healthcare prices are really going up, so a lot of people can't afford other types of care. And that can lower financial investment for all of us in the future for the country. And lastly, it's an immediate increase of the quality of life of individuals who we're serving.
Love it. Love it. So with that, we may start in certain areas, like what's the hottest button that you mentioned? Healthcare, right? Talked about changes in healthcare. You mentioned that there will be people that don't have access any other way. And now you're talking about preventive care that will cost the system less. And so starting out and building around something like that is an excellent way to do that. I liked in each of them that we talked about the whys, and of course this was all fast. We talked about the why give. We didn't all necessarily say why now in a compelling way, other than to use the word now. We may want to make sure that we can really say, in other words, if this project doesn't move forward today, what happens? What's going to be the detriment, right? Because that's what gives me the urgency, right? So why now, and what difference will it make? I heard from everybody that what difference will it make, right? And so that's a great job. Now the next phase of that would be to take, we have 4 minutes, so just bear with me. I know it's been a long morning. We've got, our next phase would be what you're really doing with that case for support. You know, I talked about the fact that it comes out in your website and in your writings and everything else. The first thing you really want to do is create an elevator pitch, which is like a 30-second pitch. Like if you were getting on an elevator talking to someone about it, and you had 30 seconds to tell someone about the project, right? You want to create that elevator pitch based upon your case statement. So, in other words, you want to be able to tell a quick story that tells why give, why now, and why is it, why give, what impact will it make, and why now, right, in 30 seconds or less, okay? And then you'd want to share that with your board so that they can make it their own and be able to deliver it in their own way. You'd want to share that with your volunteers so that they can deliver that in their own way. You want to share that with the staff that's working on it. You want to share that with everyone that's going to be acting as an ambassador for your organization, right? Does it make sense? So we covered a lot of ground, got our hands wet, our feet wet in some of that, in some of those principles right now. I know that we are going to have lunch in 2 minutes. So I want to know if you have any questions about what we went through up to this point. And there are no silly questions at all, other than those that aren't asked, because you kind of walked out and could have had the answer. So any questions? Yes, ma'am.
You said we should make a pitch based upon what?
Your case for support. That we should make a pitch based on the case for support. So using the case for support, then literally write out and time yourself to see how long it takes you to say what you've written out. Kind of like a little script, a pitch, right? And the reason for that is because you're talking to someone and you can always talk in 30-second sound bites, right? Commercials are 30 seconds usually, right? And even when we do those longer, we think about them in 30-second segments anyway, right? And put them together, we just string them together. So you can take a message and you can get someone interested in the project in the first 30 seconds. That's what you're really trying to do in an elevator pitch, right? You can give more details and you could do that in another 30-second message. So you want to start with that first one, because if we can't talk convincingly about the project, we cannot raise significant funds for the project. Okay? Yes?
At one time I was doing telemarketing,
Mm-hmm.
and they were. At one time I was dealing with telemarketing as a temp job, and they were talking about trying not to sound scripted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how would
Right.
How would you implement that?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I used a phrase that I said, make it your own, and I probably should have teased that out a little bit more. I've written telemarketing scripts for people that are doing phone-a-thons, and you probably have all heard of those share-a-thons on, yeah, written those kind of scripts. And so what we do is we give them talking points that they need to follow, but we don't want them to read verbatim because usually this. So what you do is you say, okay, here are the main points. And so you've written this out. Then you'd say, okay, now tell me in your own words what you just heard. So when I came in, I don't know what happened with your telemarketing agency, but like when I worked with Verizon especially, when we were launching DSL, I went through this half-day training. Here are the technical specifications. Here are our programs that we're giving would be you. You know, here's exactly the main points that I want you to focus on, and I listed out like 3 main points. And then I went through and said, okay, and here's a sample script that I'm giving you. Study this script. Now tell me in your own words. And that's what you really want, because you're right. You don't want someone to sound scripted, because we said the whole reason we want volunteers is that they're speaking from the heart, right? They have passion. They're speaking from the heart, okay? So that's a very easy way to get around that. Okay? But what it does, you may also be asking, well, why would you do that? Because if you don't, someone else came up and said, don't you want to talk to the people that are going out to talk on behalf of your organization? It's like, yeah, but you want to be able to shape the message that they're sending so that you know the right key messages are going out, okay? And so you could do training to make sure that that's happening as you're dealing with the volunteers, okay? Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Most of the fundraisers that churches have to do, and I believe most of us in here are part of a church board meeting. And then before we do any kind of activity, we have to bring this plan to the board of the church. And then the board of the church will give us the okay to go ahead and follow and continue what we're supposed to do.
Right.
But most of the time, if I'm not mistaken, most of us in here suffer the negatively that we receive on the board meeting. And say, no, it's not going to work. No, it's this. You don't have this. None of that. So how can, if this is a new culture for all of us.
Yes. Yes.
Right? How can we bring this culture? How can you give us tips or help us to reach out to the whole board meeting and let them know that this is not for me, it's for all of us. Right now, but it gets hard-headed inside of them that no, it is not, it cannot be done. And it gets to the point that it starts affecting the people who are wanting to do the work.
Right.
They start getting discouraged, and it starts going down to the point that we start seeing our churches being more empty than full at this point. So
Okay.
how can we
Yep.
help? How can we do something like that?
Mm-hmm. So here's what I would recommend, and you have to do the same thing. It's not just in churches, any organizations we're dealing with, right? So when I worked at Hallmark and I was launching a new product line and I had to convince them that I really want them to put $20 million into this, I know that they're not just giving over a $20 million check, right? So I'm going there, and to your point, I know who the committee members are, and I'm visiting each of those committee members first, right? And I'm telling them about the project. I'm not giving them War and Peace. I'm telling them the case for support. I'm telling them where we are now. I'm telling them where we want to be. And I'm telling them how we can get there. And then I'm telling them how they can help us. And then I'm asking if they have any questions. If they raise those questions, I'm thinking about that and saying, you know what, maybe I should rephrase. I'm doing that with you all, right? You've asked some questions, and I said, you know, I probably should have said that before. Because I'm thinking internally, you know, when I'm presenting again, I need to remember to include this, that I might be making some assumptions that I shouldn't make, right? It's the same sort of thing. So you go to each of those members, and you talk with them, and you tell them what's happening. Starting with whom? Really? I would start with the people that I have the closest relationship with. Why? Because I'm trying to draw a linkage closer. So I'm starting with them, and I'm going, okay, so I'm talking with them, and I'm getting ready. Now, when I feel like I'm getting the nods now, instead of all of the, no, this can't be done, and I'm going, well, you know, this is the way that it's been done in a lot of organizations like this. So I think we can do this. We're doing it a different way. Let's try it. Let's measure it, and we'll know. Show them that the risks are going down, right? So I'm starting with those, and then when I feel like I'm getting the nods, that's when I'm going to go to the key decision makers and say, you know, I spoke with Sister X and Brother Y and Elder whoever, and you know, they're really excited about this. They asked some great questions that made us really kind of clarify our thinking. They asked these questions. Here's what we're doing. Just wanted to inform you about this project and wanted to know how we can get you on board and know if there are any barriers. You see the pattern over and over again as we're talking about it, then we're stopping and we're listening to see what people say. And then if I really need them as a decision maker, then I'm going to say, so if I understand you correctly, and now I'm parroting, that's right, I'm paraphrasing what I've heard. If I understand your concerns correctly, I don't care what the language was, right? I want to know that I'm hitting their main point. If I understand your concerns correctly, then you're telling me if we could get rid of this risk, and this risk, that you would be on board. Is that right? That gets rid of the people that just say, no, can't be done. No, 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 no. Now you've put them into a box where they've got to make a decision, right? So you're saying if we do these things, you feel good about this, right? Yes. Okay, here's how we're addressing this. Or, okay, you know what? The group's going to look at that and let us come back to you. That almost always will work really well. When I've sat on boards, and when I was sitting on boards, that's exactly what I would do. Beforehand, I'm talking to the finance person, I'm talking to the pastor about it, but I'm talking to the pastor later. Because the pastor oftentimes wants to know that he's not fighting a vain fight, and so I want to show them that we've got some other people on board. I don't know if others of you have some other things that you've done, but you may want to talk to them, talk about those over lunch. Hopefully that was helpful.